Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Big Blue Drew 97 here, coming at you with another manga review for My Hero Academia. This time, manga chapter 286, titled One Among Us. Chances are high enough, I'm probably going to make an Among Us meme slash joke in this video, or it's going to be in the thumbnail. Either way, the enemy is among us. And frankly, when it comes to this actual title for this chapter, I think that it's implying more about the vestiges themselves than one particular individual, but we'll get there when we get there. So, when it comes to this chapter of My Hero Academia, I'm just going to say it is a great build-up chapter for what we're going to be getting in the next chapter, manga chapter 287, with the buildup of the vestiges, with Deku and his confrontation with Shigaraki, and the potential plans of All for One and what his true goal is, as well as, touching on points of Gigantomachia, as well as the students coming to a realization that they are screwed. And before we get right into the chapter review, I'd like to ask y'all to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Big Blue Drew 97, as well as leave a like if you like the content that I'm bringing to y'all. And as well as in comment, I'd like to ask y'all if y'all want to leave a comment, talk about how you thought this chapter was going to go and what do you think is going to come on next chapter. And without the way, let's get right into the review. So, we start the review continuing from what happened last chapter, which I'm trying to remember what happened last chapter. Oh yeah, Bakugo died, or more specifically, got skewered by All for One's little black tendrils. So we get the continuation of that, and we have some interesting dialogue from Bakugo. He's apparently talking to Deku and how he's saying, "Don't go playing hero by yourself," as he gets stabbed by Shigaraki, or maybe it's All for One. It's definitely All for One. At this moment, All for One has taken over Shigaraki's body, and what is very important about this scene as well is that you see Shigaraki's head just bobbing back and forth as if he's trying to take control of it over his body, as well as he says "stop it" in reference to his sensei, All for One. So Bakugo begins falling to the ground, but luckily enough, Shoto, while carrying his father, catches Bakugo, and something horrible that Shigaraki says, or maybe it's All for One. Either way, they talk about how, like, this fight today, how a lot of useless blood was shed, and he refers to Bakugo being basically the most useless of them all. And while he says that, we get a little bit of explanation, most likely for the quirk One for All. That, if you remember correctly, what is being said is that if you act out of rage, your power will respond accordingly. The most important part is to keep your head clear. That is in reference, most likely, to what one of the users, Banjo, if I remember correctly, he would be the 6th user. Yeah, because Nana Shimura is 7. He's either the 6th or the 5th user. But he talks about how the quirk can respond to anger. And it definitely is, because after Deku sees his friend, he sees Kanchan being stabbed and falls to the ground, you just have this expression of just pure anger and just hatred in his eyes. It's not really even like just anger, it's just his eyes are filled with hatred as he goes and crushes these black tendrils of All for One, as he declares to Shigaraki to take it back in reference to what he said about Kanchan being useless. And then at this moment, Shigaraki's face, like almost dead center, cracks open, and we see that All for One is inside of it. And what is interesting about this, and something else that is talked about a little bit later on in this chapter, is that when you see that All for One is inside Shigaraki's face, there are two camps for it. He is either literally in Shigaraki's face, or he's figuratively in Shigaraki's face, or particularly figuratively in his head. One is like he's literally inside Shigaraki. Deku is literally seeing All for One. Shigaraki is a shell for All for One, the master, and like he's actually in there figuratively, as in it's symbolic to All for One taking control of Shigaraki's body and like being in his head mentally, as well as through the quirk mentally in his head. So there are two camps for it, and you would think that, oh, it has to be more figurative than literal. But then there's a point brought up by Gigantomachia, because now we cut over to Gigantomachia and how he's destroying the city. The city is in peril. You have a helicopter news reporter reporting on the incident about how the villain is rampaging through Soru City and how nothing's stopping him, and apparently a granny is gonna die. And then we have Gigantomachia, who talks about Master in reference to Shigaraki, but he's like, there's two of them. Meaning that he's like actually smelling both Shigaraki and All For One. Meaning that at the very least, All For One, the user, the first user of the quirk, All For One, that's confusing, is physically present in the world to the point where Gigantomachia can physically smell him. So this means that when we saw All For One in the crack of Shigaraki's face, that could be more figurative, but it is just as plausible as it is he's literally like present in Shigaraki or on Shigaraki, or through some way is actually in the real world. So that's really something interesting, something that I could possibly talk about more on, about how All For One is physically in this world here at this moment, as well as in the quirk, as well as in Tartarus. So that's just a cool piece of information that was dropped in this chapter. But from this point, we also get more reflection of how the reporters are telling everyone that they need to evacuate Jaku City, how the residents need to escape, while having the heroes going after the villains, as well as alerting to the other group who's fighting Shigaraki about the fact that this villain is heading in their direction. Because if you remember correctly, and this is even brought up in this chapter, that the Shigaraki who's fighting Endeavor, Deku, Bakugo, Eraser, they don't know about the fact that Gigantomachia is on his way there. So you're going to have heroes having to go and tell them that so that they can prepare for that inevitability. Where we see Ida, Froppy, we see Uraka, we see other characters from 1B, the manga phase looking guy, as well as Kota, as well as we also get to see and Nejire, as these students are either helping with the evacuation of the city or possibly going towards Deku and the others and try to warn them of Gigantomachia. And as well as from here, we get Ochako, who's really coming to the realization about how the situation, not just like with like them fighting Shigaraki in Jaku City, not specifically that, but the entirety of them facing the villains and how it's not improving at all. That they fought Shigaraki, they had the villains invade the summer camp when they were training. You had the fall of All Might, and how she's basically thinking how what's happening is like the sun setting and the shadows stretching over everything, as she has this concern for the guys, most likely referring to Bakugo, Deku, and Shoto. And her concern is valid because Bakugo got stabbed, Deku is beating himself up, and they're fighting a literal monster named Shigaraki. Speaking of a monster named Shigaraki, Shigaraki finally places his hand on Deku's face while Deku is in this state of anger and manic. And even in this moment, he's angry. He comes to this realization that, oh no, as Shoto screams at Midoriya, as you have Shigaraki basically saying, I finally touched you. Now be mine, one for all. And while he's saying this, you see this little like ting of like, whoa, what's going on here? As we cut over to Deku in the world of the vestiges, most likely inside the quirk of One for All, as he remembers this place. And we see that Deku is more physical in this world, as we see that he's not just eyes, head, and a hand. He now has a torso, arm, and part of his leg. But he also comes to the realization of where he is, and he's looking out into the distance, and he sees something. He's like, that's Shiga. Wait, no, that's, as we see that All for One, the person, is like over Shigaraki. His body is like covering, or part of his body is covering Shigaraki, and they're having this conversation. Shigaraki is telling him to get out, don't get any closer, but All for One is like, come on, child. Like, think about everything I've done. Without me, you would have been dead, burned alive. And even if that wasn't the case, just look at you. You would die from this height, right? So you have freaking All for One just trying to like persuade Shigaraki to give his body, is trying to convince him. Like, it's like almost like an abusive relationship they have, but the difference is that they're both abusers in this relationship, so that makes it a little bit horribly worse, as we have Shigaraki basically telling his father figure to shut up, and how he's following his path and his dream. And while Deku is looking on this in just fear and anxiety, he falls to the ground because he comes to realize that he can't really do anything or say anything, because he doesn't have a mouth, he barely has legs. But then a hand is placed onto Deku's head, and from there we get the reveal of Nana Shimura, who tells Deku that we'll do something about that, in reference to the fact that she says that you can't move in this world yet, but don't worry, we'll do something about that. As the chapter ends, and oh my gosh, as I said before, this chapter is setting up for a very, and I mean very dialogue heavy, emotional chapter, just expositional dump of most likely what All for One is and One for All is, as well as building a connection between Deku and Shigaraki that is more than just hero and villain. They're going to have more of a personal connection, as well as the fact that Nana Shimura is here. This is going to be great interactions, not just between Deku and Shigaraki, but Shigaraki and Nana Shimura. Nana Shimura versus the original All for One, who killed her. Possibly the reveal that she is Shigaraki's grandmother, and that his father figure killed her, where Shigaraki may have a change of heart. And even just Deku coming into like a realization of like, this is the man that just decimated like his All Might, that All Might could barely defeat. He comes to realize, like, how am I supposed to defeat this? So all of this is most likely going to be in the next chapter, and I'm so excited for it. Also, when it comes to the idea of the title, when it comes to One Among Us, I think that the title also refers directly to the vestiges themselves, specifically when it comes to Nana Shimura talking to Deku about how he cannot move in this world. So I believe that when it comes to One Among Us, she's referring to what she might do, or in reference to her making Deku being able to be visible in this world and being able to react like in this world, basically to act on this world itself. So that is what I think the title of this chapter, Among Us, means. So overall, this was a good setup chapter, because as I said, this chapter is setting up for just the interactions between Deku, Nana, All for One, and Shigaraki, and possibly the reveal of what All for One and One for All are when it comes to their nature and how the vestiges work. So that was good when it comes to this chapter, as well as just showing how emotional Deku is. Just seeing this raw anger out of Deku is just always pleasing. Even though we've been seeing it for 5 or 6 chapters, I've always come back just to see this visceral hatred, because we've never seen this from Deku, and we may never see this from Deku for a long while, if not ever again. So I'm just absorbing all of it. So it's just really cool to read and see how beautiful this is. As well as if I could say anything that was weak about this chapter, it's possibly the point of like cutting over to Gigantomachia and Ochako. I know it makes sense to cut back over to Gigantomachia, just showing like how close he is to getting to Shigaraki, putting a time limit on the fight between Deku and Shigaraki, and like limiting how much we'll actually get out of this conversation. But still, what I enjoyed from that is that at least it's involving these other students in it. It's not just solely focused on Deku. It's not solely focused on the fight. It's also showing that, yeah, there are repercussions outside of this fight, and that what's going to happen with this entire situation will like ring not just through the students' lives, but through the lives of everyone in Japan. As well as like we don't get the confirmation of whether or not not Deku, we also do not get the confirmation of whether or not Bakugo has his quirk stolen, but we do know that at the very least, like, Shigaraki thinks that he's about to take Deku's quirk. So I think that even though those black tendrils came out of Shigaraki instead of Bakugo, I'm starting to think that he may not have been able to, did not take his quirk. And I think that all one for all and all for one, for them to either give or take quirks, they must have direct contact. They must physically touch the person, because that's what we've seen throughout the entire story, that all for one has to physically touch someone to take and give quirks. So I think that even though we saw Bakugo get stabbed, I still think that he does have his quirk. So yeah, like I said, overall, really did enjoy this chapter. This is basically a setup chapter for the next chapter, which I am very excited to read and review for y'all. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you enjoyed this chapter. Leave a like if you really liked this video. Leave a comment on what you enjoyed about this chapter, what you enjoyed about this review. I realized I didn't make an Among Us meme, so but yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Do all of that cool jazz, like, comment, subscribe, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye for now.